My hands shook as I examined the text messages on Jessica's unlocked phone. 3 hours before my rehearsal dinner, and there it was. Irrefutable evidence that my fiancé had been sleeping with Ryan, my best friend and best man for months. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The same Ryan who'd helped me pick out her engagement ring. The same Ryan who'd signed as witness on our venue contract, promising to stand beside me on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. My name is Daniel Mitchell. At 32, I was living what most would consider a successful life in Portland, Oregon. I'd spent the last 8 years building my architectural design firm from the ground up, specializing in sustainable urban homes. My portfolio had recently been featured in Northwest Living magazine, and the business was finally turning the kind of profit that let me sleep at night without checking my bank account. But the achievement I was most proud of was convincing. Jessica Collins, the brilliant event planner I'd met 3 years earlier at a charity gala, to marry me. With her wild copper hair and infectious laugh, Jess had captivated me from the moment she'd corrected my wine pairing at the open bar. "Cabernet with chocolate dessert. Brave choice," she'd said, with a smirk that made my heart skip. Our relationship had moved quickly. Within 6 months, she'd moved into my downtown loft. By our first anniversary, we were discussing kids and a house in the suburbs. When I proposed at Cannon Beach last summer, the sun setting behind Haystack Rock, she'd cried, happy tears that I mistook for absolute devotion. "Of course I'll marry you, Danny," she'd whispered against my lips. "There's no one else I'd rather spend forever with." Ryan Cooper had been the first person I called after she said yes. My best friend since college, Ryan, had been there through my parents' messy divorce, my father's subsequent absence, and my struggle to launch my business when everyone said I should take a secure job at an established firm. He'd helped me move apartments 3 times, loaned me money during the lean months, and talked me through my pre-proposal panic. "You're doing the right thing, man," he'd assured me over beers the week before I bought the ring. "Jess is the one. I've never seen you so happy." I'd asked him to be my best man without hesitation. "There's no one else I'd trust more," I told him, clapping him on the shoulder. "You've been my brother through everything." The wedding planning had been a whirlwind, with Jessica taking the lead given her expertise. We'd booked Evergreen Gardens, estate, a historic mansion with 16 acres of perfectly manicured gardens, and a view of Mount Hood that made your heart ache. The deposit alone had been $15,000, nearly cleaning out my savings, but Jess had convinced me it was worth it. "This is our only wedding, Danny," she'd said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Don't you want it to be perfect?" Everything seemed perfect, right up until 3 days before the ceremony. I'd been working late, finalizing a design presentation for a potential new client. When I got home around midnight, Jess was already asleep, her phone charging on the nightstand. It lit up with a text notification just as I was changing for bed. I shouldn't have looked. Some ancient instinct for self-preservation should have warned me to leave it alone. But the name that flashed on the screen stopped me cold. Ryan. Who? Texts their friend's fiancé at midnight 3 days before the wedding? I picked up the phone, telling myself I was being paranoid. Jess didn't have a passcode, something I'd teased her about, calling her an analog girl in a digital world. And the message preview showed only, "Can't wait to see you, Tom." My thumb hovered over the screen for a moment before I swiped to unlock it. The full message appeared. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Thinking about last week has been driving me crazy. We should talk about what happens after." I scrolled up, my stomach sinking with each message I read. The exchanges dated back nearly 4 months, starting innocently enough. Wedding details, friendly banter, but gradually evolving into something unmistakably intimate. Plans to meet when I was out of town. Inside jokes, reminiscences about encounters described in just enough detail to leave no doubt about their nature. Remember that time in the back of your car? Ryan had written. Never knew event planning required such flexibility. Jess had responded with a laughing emoji. And architects aren't the only ones who understand structural integrity. Though I think we tested some load-bearing limits that night. The most recent messages discussed their situation and how they needed to figure things out. Several references to after the wedding made it clear they'd been weighing their options. In my shocked state, I took screenshots of everything, emailing them to myself before placing the phone exactly where I'd found it. Then I went to the living room, sat on the couch in the dark, and tried to breathe through the crushing weight on my chest. By dawn, shock had hardened into something else entirely, a cold, clarifying anger that pushed aside the hurt just enough for me to think. I left before Jessica woke up, sending her a text about an early client meeting. In reality, I drove to the coast, to the same beach where I'd proposed, and tried to figure out what to do. Cancel the wedding, expose them both at the rehearsal dinner, pretend I knew nothing, marry her anyway, and make both our lives miserable. None of the options felt right. I needed advice from someone who wouldn't immediately take my side or urge me toward rash action. I called my sister Olivia. 4 years older and infinitely wiser, she'd been my rock since our father left. Now a family law attorney in Seattle, she had a perspective I desperately needed. "I'm coming down," she said immediately after I explained the situation, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Don't do anything until I get there. Don't confront Jess. Don't talk to Ryan. Just act normal and wait for me." Acting normal proved nearly impossible. I went through the motions at work, nodding during meetings, while my mind replayed those text messages on an excruciating loop. When I returned home that evening, Jess was buzzing with pre-wedding excitement, showing me photos of the final floral arrangements and telling me about last-minute adjustments to the seating chart. "Ryan's been so helpful," she said, not meeting my eyes. "He picked up the place cards this morning and dropped them at the venue." "That's great," I managed, wondering if they'd met afterward, if they'd touched each other while my name was being embossed on cards designating me as her soon-to-be husband. Olivia arrived the next morning, using a legal conference as her cover. Jessica was out for her final dress fitting, giving us time to talk. I showed Olivia the screenshots. "Bastards," she muttered, scrolling through them. Then she put down my phone and looked at me with a surprising calm. "What do you want out of this, Danny? Not what you think you should do. What outcome do you actually want?" The question caught me off guard. What did I want? Certainly not to marry a woman who could betray me so thoroughly, not to maintain a friendship with the person who'd facilitated that betrayal. But beyond that, I want them to feel what I'm feeling, I admitted, ashamed of the vindictiveness, but unable to deny it. And I want to not lose everything. The venue, deposit, the honeymoon I paid for, the future I thought I had. I put everything I had into this wedding. Olivia nodded slowly. "You mentioned the venue contract. Ryan signed as a witness." "Yeah, it's one of those fancy places with a strict contract. Non-refundable deposit, liability clauses, all that. Ryan's a real estate agent, so he looked it over for me and said it was standard. He literally signed right under where I did." A slow smile spread across my sister's face, the same expression she'd had as a teenager when plotting revenge against neighborhood kids who'd wronged us. "I think I need to see this contract. Do you have a copy?" I dug through my files and handed her the documents. She spent 20 minutes reading, making occasional notes, before setting it down with a decisive tap. "Daniel, listen carefully. Do not cancel the wedding yet." "What?" I stared at her. "I can't go through with—" "I didn't say go through with it," she interrupted. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." I said, "Don't cancel yet. There's a difference, and it's worth about $15,000 to you." She pointed to a specific clause in the contract. This section on co-signers and witnesses. It's not standard at all. Ryan didn't just witness your signature. The way this is written, he actually shares financial responsibility if the contract is breached under certain conditions. My mind struggled to follow her logic. What conditions? Moral turpitude, she said, tapping the paragraph. It's an old-fashioned term they've included here, basically covering behavior that's considered contrary to community standards of honesty or good morals. Like, for instance, sleeping with the bride when you're supposed to be the groom's best man. A flicker of something, not quite hope, but perhaps its vengeful cousin, sparked within me. You're saying I could get my deposit back? Olivia's smile widened. I'm saying Ryan might be on the hook for it if we play this right, and that's just the beginning. Over the next hour, my sister outlined a plan so precisely calibrated that it bordered on artistic. It wasn't about public humiliation or dramatic confrontations. It was about controlled demolition, dismantling the facade my fiancé and best friend had built, while ensuring I walked away with my dignity and finances intact. You'll need to be calm, Olivia warned. Emotional outbursts will undermine everything. Can you keep it together when you see them? I thought about Jessica's face when she lied to me, about Ryan's arm around my shoulder at the suit fitting, calling me brother. I can keep it together, I promised. Just tell me what to do. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for that evening at an upscale restaurant overlooking the Willamette River. Our closest friends and family would be there, including both sets of parents. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a night of toasts and tears, the emotional prelude to the main event. Instead, it became the stage for the first phase of Olivia's plan. I arrived early with my sister, greeting guests with practiced smiles. When Jessica arrived, stunning in a cream-colored cocktail dress, I kissed her cheek and told her she looked beautiful. When Ryan showed up minutes later, I clapped him on the back and handed him a scotch, his favorite. To brotherhood, I said, raising my glass. Brotherhood, he echoed, a flicker of something, guilt, concern, crossing his face before he drank. Throughout the dinner, I was the perfect groom to be, attentive and affectionate toward Jessica, while including Ryan in every conversation. If anyone noticed my smile never quite reached my eyes, they didn't mention it. After the main course, just before dessert would be served, I stood and tapped my glass. The room quieted, all eyes turning to me in anticipation of what they assumed would be a heartfelt speech. Before we continue with the evening, I began, voice steady, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the person who's truly made this wedding possible. Someone whose contribution has been invaluable, who's been by my side through everything. Jessica beamed up at me, clearly expecting to be the subject of my praise. Ryan looked down modestly, anticipating his best man acknowledgement. I'm talking, of course, about my incredible sister, Olivia Mitchell. Surprise flickered across the table. This wasn't the traditional speech they'd expected. Not only has she been my rock throughout my life, but her legal expertise has recently helped me understand some interesting aspects of our venue contract. I raised my glass toward her. To Olivia, who reminds me daily that the fine print matters in both law and relationships. Confusion rippled through the room. Jessica's smile faltered. Ryan shifted, uncomfortably in his seat. In fact, I continued, I've learned so much about contracts recently, about witnesses and liabilities and breaches. I looked directly at Ryan. Would you agree that people should be held accountable when they violate the terms of an agreement, Ryan? Being in real estate, I mean. His face paled slightly. Yeah, of course. Wonderful, I smiled. Because I've scheduled a meeting with Mrs. Harrington at Evergreen Gardens tomorrow morning to discuss some concerns about our arrangement. I'd like you to join me as co-signer. Co-signer? Jessica interjected, her voice pitched slightly higher than normal. Ryan just witnessed the contract, right? Actually, Olivia cut in smoothly, the specific language in the document creates joint liability under certain circumstances. It's quite fascinating from a legal perspective. Ryan was now visibly uncomfortable. Look, man, tomorrow's going to be busy with wedding prep. Oh, I insist, I said, still smiling. In fact, it's essential you're there. The meeting's at 9. I've already confirmed with Mrs. Harrington. An awkward silence fell over the table. I raised my glass again. To accountability, I said quietly, before taking a drink. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of strained conversation and confused glances. Several times I caught Jessica trying to make eye contact with Ryan, who was doing his best to appear engrossed in conversation with my college roommate. As guests began to leave, Jessica pulled me aside, her fingernails digging into my arm. What was that about? She hissed. Why are you meeting with the venue, and why does Ryan need to be there? I covered her hand with mine, gently removing it from my arm. Just some contractual details to iron out before the big day. Nothing for you to worry about. Danny, you're acting weird. If there's a problem, no problem at all, I assured her, kissing her forehead while my heart turned to stone. Everything's going exactly as it should. Back at our apartment, Jessica continued probing, her questions becoming increasingly desperate as I deflected each one. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Ryan, which I deliberately read in her presence without responding. Ryan seems concerned about tomorrow, I noted casually. 7 messages in the last hour. Must be important. Jessica's face went through a complex series of expressions, concern, fear, calculation, before settling on forced nonchalance. Maybe you should call him. Find out what's wrong. I think we all know what's wrong, Jess, I said quietly, finally dropping the pretense. The question is what we're going to do about it. Her eyes widened, then immediately narrowed in an attempt to appear confused. What are you talking about? I simply pulled out my phone, opened my email, and showed her the screenshots of her conversations with Ryan. As she scrolled through them, the color drained from her face. Danny, I can explain. I'm sure you can, I interrupted, my voice calm despite the storm inside me. You can explain tomorrow at 9, with Ryan and Mrs. Harrington and my lawyer friend Marcus, who'll be joining us. For now, I think you should pack an overnight bag and stay somewhere else. You're throwing me out the night before our wedding? Her outrage would have been convincing, if not for the panic underneath it. I'm suggesting you might be more comfortable elsewhere, given the circumstances, I replied. The wedding is, of course, no longer happening. Tears filled her eyes, whether from genuine remorse or thwarted plans, I couldn't tell anymore. Danny, please, we can work through this. It was a mistake, a stupid mistake. 4 months is not a mistake, Jessica. It's a choice, made repeatedly by both of you. She tried another approach, moving closer, placing her hand on my chest. I love you, not him. It was just physical. It didn't mean anything. I stepped back, her touch now repulsive, where once it had been everything I wanted. That actually makes it worse, I said quietly. Now please, pack a bag. After 20 more minutes of pleading and accusations, I was unfeeling, I was overreacting. I had probably done things too, hadn't I? She finally left, slamming the door behind her. I had no doubt she was headed straight to Ryan's apartment, where they would desperately try to formulate a plan for tomorrow's meeting. Let them try. The advantage was firmly on my side now. I slept surprisingly well that night, the decision made, the path forward clear. In the morning, I dressed carefully in my best suit, the one I'd planned to get married in, and met Olivia and Marcus for breakfast before heading to Evergreen Gardens. Remember, Olivia counseled as we pulled up to the venue, stay calm. Stick to the facts and let Mrs. Harrington reach her own conclusions. Mrs. Harrington was a stern woman in her 60s who ran the estate with military precision. She greeted us in her office, confusion evident when she saw I'd arrived with two people she didn't recognize, neither of whom was my fiancé. "I was expecting Ms. Collins as well," she said, glancing at her appointment book. "She'll be joining us shortly, along with Mr. Cooper," I explained. "In the meantime, this is my sister Olivia Mitchell and my friend Marcus Stevens. Both are attorneys who've been helping me understand the terms of our contract." Mrs. Harrington's expression sharpened. She'd been in business long enough to recognize when a legal situation was developing. "I see. And what aspects of the contract require clarification, Mr. Mitchell?" Just then, the door opened, and Jessica entered with Ryan close behind. Both looked as if they hadn't slept. Jessica's eyes puffy from crying, Ryan's jaw tight with attention. They hesitated when they saw me sitting calmly with my legal team. "Please join us," I said, gesturing to the remaining chairs. Mrs. Harrington looked between us, clearly sensing the tension. "Perhaps someone could explain what this meeting is about." Olivia stepped in smoothly. "Mrs. Harrington, we're here to discuss a potential breach of contract regarding the Mitchell-Collins wedding scheduled for tomorrow. Specifically, we need to address how the moral turpitude clause applies in this situation." "Moral turpitude," Mrs. Harrington repeated, eyebrows rising. Ryan leaned forward. "Look, this is obviously some kind of misunderstanding." "Is it?" I interrupted, pulling out copies of the screenshots. "Because my understanding is that sleeping with the groom's fiancée while serving as his best man would qualify as a breach of community moral standards by most definitions." I slid the papers across the desk toward Mrs. Harrington, particularly when said best man is also a co-signer on the venue contract. The room went silent as Mrs. Harrington reviewed the evidence. Jessica stared at her hands. Ryan looked as if he might be sick. "Mr. Cooper," Mrs. Harrington finally said, her voice cold with disapproval, "you did indeed sign this contract as more than just a witness. Section 12, paragraph B clearly states that signatories share liability if the event is cancelled due to circumstances involving moral turpitude on their part." I didn't know that's what I was signing," Ryan stammered. "You're a real estate agent," Marcus pointed out. "You advised Mr. Mitchell that the contract was standard and appropriate. Either you failed in your professional duty to properly review the document, or you deliberately misled him. Neither reflects well on you." Mrs. Harrington turned to me, her expression softening slightly. "Mr. Mitchell, I presume the wedding will not be taking place?" "No, Mrs. Harrington, it will not." She nodded once. "Then according to the terms of this contract, the $15,000 deposit would typically be forfeit." Jessica made a small, distressed sound. Ryan's face had gone from pale to grey. "However," Mrs. Harrington continued, "given the circumstances and the evidence presented, Mr. Cooper appears liable for that amount. Additionally, the moral turpitude clause allows for transfer of all contractual obligations to the offending party." Olivia smiled thinly. Which means, Mrs. Harrington said, shuffling through the paperwork, "that any additional fees associated with the cancellation, the catering minimum, staffing costs, etc., would fall to Mr. Cooper rather than Mr. Mitchell." Ryan stood abruptly. "This is insane. You can't possibly expect me to pay for an entire wedding that isn't happening." "Actually," Marcus said, "the contract you signed and endorsed as appropriate makes exactly that expectation. The estimated total is—" He looked to Mrs. Harrington. "Just under $38,000, she supplied. The blood drained from Ryan's face as he collapsed back into his chair. Jessica finally spoke, her voice small. "Danny, please. This was never meant to hurt you. We can work something out." I looked at her directly for the first time since she'd entered the room. Once, I'd thought I would spend my life with this woman. Now I barely recognized her. We are working something out, I said calmly. The contractual issues are being resolved as we speak. As for the personal aspects, I shrugged. Consider yourself free to pursue whatever relationship you desire with Ryan. Though I should mention he recently lost a significant amount of money, so adjustments to your lifestyle may be necessary. 2 hours later, after paperwork had been signed and payment arrangements made, I stood in the gardens behind the estate, looking out at the view of Mount Hood that was supposed to have been the backdrop for my vows. Olivia found me there, putting a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You did well in there," she said. "How are you feeling?" I considered the question carefully. The betrayal still hurt. The loss of what I'd thought was my future still ached. But something else had taken root alongside the pain. A quiet pride in how I'd handled myself, a renewed appreciation for the people who truly had my back, and the first tentative sense that perhaps I'd dodged a bullet rather than lost a prize. "I'm feeling," I replied slowly, "like I just saved myself from making a $38,000 mistake." She laughed, squeezing my shoulder. "That's a start." We walked back to the car in companionable silence. As we reached it, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Please call me, we need to talk." I showed it to Olivia, who arched an eyebrow. "What are you going to do?" I deleted the message, then put my phone away. "Drive," I said simply. "I'm thinking the coast. I could use some fresh air." As we pulled away from Evergreen Gardens, I didn't look back at the venue or the life I was leaving behind. Instead, I looked forward, through the windshield, at the road ahead and the wide-open future that now belonged entirely to me. The coastal drive with Olivia that day was exactly what I needed. Windows down, music loud enough to drown out my thoughts, and the endless stretch of Highway 101 offering a physical manifestation of the distance I was putting between myself and the wreckage of what should have been my wedding weekend. We stopped at a small motel in Seaside, a beachfront property with peeling paint and surprisingly comfortable beds. I slept for 14 hours straight, my body finally surrendering to the exhaustion of the past few days. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through thin curtains, and Olivia was sitting on the balcony with 2 cups of coffee and a bag of pastries from a local bakery. "You look terrible," she said, pushing a cup toward me as I joined her. "I feel better than I look," I replied, surprising myself with the truth of it. Physically, I was drained, but mentally a fog had lifted. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe without a weight on my chest. Olivia studied me over the rim of her coffee cup. "Your phone's been blowing up." I took the liberty of checking the notifications. 3 missed calls from Jessica, 7 from Ryan, and about 20 text messages between them. Plus your mum called twice, wondering why you're not at the final wedding preparations. I winced, suddenly remembering the wider ripple effects of my cancelled wedding. "I should call Mom, explain things." "Already did," Olivia said. "Gave her the basics. She's furious on your behalf and says to take all the time you need." Relief washed over me, one less difficult conversation to have. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the barrage of notifications without opening any of them. Jessica's latest text caught my eye. "You have no idea what you've done to Ryan. He can't afford this. Please be reasonable." A hollow laugh escaped me as I showed it to Olivia. "Unbelievable. She's worried about his financial situation." "They deserve each other," Olivia said flatly. "Now eat something. We're meeting Marcus for lunch in Cannon Beach in an hour. He's bringing paperwork." "More paperwork? Hasn't Ryan signed his life away enough already?" My sister smiled her shark-like smile. "This isn't about Ryan. This is about protecting you going forward." Marcus was waiting for us at a seafood restaurant overlooking Haystack Rock, the same view that had backdropped my proposal to Jessica a year earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me as we slid into the booth across from him. You look better than expected, he said, pushing a folder toward me. These are restraining order applications, just in case either of them decides to get confrontational. And this, he slid over another document, is a cease and desist regarding any communication about you to mutual contacts, clients, or on social media. I raised an eyebrow. You think that's necessary? People get nasty when they're cornered, Olivia interjected. Jessica's reputation in the event planning world is on the line, and Ryan stands to lose a lot of money. They might try to rewrite the narrative with you as the villain. The thought hadn't occurred to me until then. I'd been so focused on my own pain and my own revenge that I hadn't considered how they might retaliate. Sign them, Marcus advised. We won't file unless needed, but better to have them ready. As I signed the documents, my phone buzzed again. Ryan, this time. This isn't fair and you know it. I made a mistake, but you're destroying my life. Let's talk like adults. I showed the message to my companions, who exchanged glances. Block them both, Olivia suggested. At least for now, give yourself some space to think. She was right. I blocked their numbers, then their social media accounts for good measure. The immediate relief was palpable, like putting down a heavy bag I'd been carrying. Over lunch, the conversation shifted from legal matters to more practical concerns. My sister and Marcus had clearly been planning while I slept. Your apartment lease is up in 2 months, Olivia reminded me. Jessica's name isn't on it, correct? I nodded. We'd talked about putting the lease in both our names when renewing, but had decided to wait until after the wedding. Good. That gives you time to figure out your next move without immediate housing pressure. Though honestly, I'd start looking right away. She paused, taking a sip of her wine. And the honeymoon? How much of that can you get back? The honeymoon. I'd almost forgotten about the 2 weeks in New Zealand we'd planned, the adventure, tour packages and boutique hotels I'd paid for months in advance. Some of it should be refundable, with cancellation fees, I said, mentally calculating the potential losses. Maybe half, if I'm lucky. Marcus looked thoughtful. When were you supposed to leave? 3 days from now. Monday morning flight from Portland to Auckland. Go. I stared at him. What? Go on the honeymoon, he repeated. By yourself. The flights are paid for, some accommodations will be non-refundable anyway, and honestly, 2 weeks away from here is exactly what you need right now. The idea was so unexpected that I laughed. Take my honeymoon alone? That's just sad. Olivia was nodding, though, warming to the concept. It's actually perfect. You'll be literally on the other side of the world while the gossip here dies down. By the time you get back, this will be old news. And you can start fresh, Marcus added. Consider it a palate cleanser. Jessica was supposed to be your future, now that future is entirely yours to redefine. I sat back, considering it. There was something appealing about the idea of standing on a New Zealand mountaintop, surrounded by landscapes from Lord of the Rings, completely disconnected from the mess I was leaving behind. I'll think about it, I promised. We spent the rest of the afternoon walking on the beach, deliberately avoiding any more talk of Jessica or Ryan or weddings. Instead, we reminisced about childhood vacations, debated the merits of various sci-fi franchises, and plotted an elaborate bathroom renovation for Olivia's Seattle condo. Normal things, healing things. That evening, after Marcus had headed back to Portland, Olivia and I sat on the motel balcony, watching the sunset over the Pacific. Thank you, I said quietly, for dropping everything to help me, for having a plan when I couldn't think straight. She nudged my shoulder with hers. That's what big sisters do. Besides, I've never liked Jessica. Too calculated, I snorted. Now you tell me, would you have listened? Love makes people stupid. Apparently. We fell silent, watching the sky turn from orange to deep purple. When did you know? Olivia finally asked. Really know, I mean. Before you saw the texts. I considered the question, thinking back over the past months. There were signs, little things. Jessica working late more often, being protective of her phone, Ryan cancelling plans with me, but then posting Instagram stories from bars. But I didn't want to see it. No one ever does, she said softly. The worst part is I still miss her, I admitted, the words painful in my throat. Or I miss who I thought she was. Is that pathetic? It's human, Olivia replied. You're grieving a relationship that was important to you, even if it wasn't what you thought. That takes time. How much time? She smiled sadly. Longer. And than you want. Less than you fear. The next morning, Olivia had to return to Seattle for a court appearance she couldn't reschedule. I decided to stay at the coast another day, needing the solitude to think. Call me if you need anything, she said, hugging me tightly before getting into her car. And seriously consider the honeymoon. The worst thing you could do right now is sit around your apartment alone, thinking about what should have been happening. After she left, I walked down to the beach, phone in hand, and pulled up my email. The flight confirmations, hotel reservations, and tour bookings for New Zealand filled my inbox, thousands of dollars and months of planning laid out in neatly organized folders. I thought about canceling it all, taking the financial hit as just another cost of this disastrous chapter of my life. But then I remembered something my father had said during one of our rare post-divorce conversations. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. I opened the flight confirmation email and changed the passenger information, removing Jessica's name and keeping only mine. A single traveler, setting out alone. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Just as I finished, a new email notification appeared. From Ryan's real estate agency address, subject line, please read this. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Daniel, I know you've blocked my personal contacts, but I'm hoping you'll see this. What happened between Jessica and me was inexcusable. I betrayed your trust in the worst possible way, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But the financial penalty you've engineered is disproportionate. $38,000 will bankrupt me. I'm begging for some compromise. The friendship we had for 10 years has to be worth something. Please call me so we can work something out. Ryan. The email ignited something in me, not the raw hurt of before, but a cold, clarifying anger. I hit reply. Ryan, our 10-year friendship was worth everything to me. I would have done anything for you. That's what makes your betrayal so complete. You didn't just sleep with my fiancée. You looked me in the eye day after day, helped me plan the wedding, stood beside me while I talked about my future with her, knowing what you were doing behind my back. As for the money, you signed a contract. You told me it was standard. You, a licensed real estate agent, vouched for that document. Either you didn't read it, professional negligence, or you knew exactly what you were signing, fraud. Neither. Reflects well on you. There's a saying in architecture, measure twice, cut once. Perhaps in the future, you'll be more careful about where you point your tape measure. No compromise is coming. Do not contact me again. Daniel, I hit send, then immediately blocked his work email as well. Let him read that while figuring out how to make his first payment to Evergreen Gardens. Back at the motel, I called the airline and confirmed my solo reservation to Auckland. Then I called my business partner, Tim, to let him know I'd be out of the office for 2 weeks. Dude, I heard what happened, he said immediately. Olivia filled me in. That's brutal. Yeah, well, life's full of surprises, I replied, trying for levity and failing. Can you cover my projects until I get back? Already on it. The Riverside renovation is on schedule, and I pushed the Hanson meeting to next month. Take whatever time you need. I felt a rush of gratitude for my business partner. We'd started the firm together 5 years ago, specializing in sustainable urban redesigns. He'd been at the dinner last night, had seen my cryptic toast. He must have pieced things together even before Olivia called him. "Thanks, Tim, I owe you." "You'd do the same for me," he said simply. "Oh, and Daniel, Jessica called the office this morning looking for you. I told her you were unavailable indefinitely and that all her belongings would be boxed and ready for pickup at a time of your convenience." I winced, imagining that conversation. That's odd, direct. "She slept with your best friend and was going to marry you anyway," Tim said flatly. "She doesn't deserve politeness." After hanging up, I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the wall. What now? I had nearly 48 hours before my flight to New Zealand. Going back to Portland felt wrong, but staying here alone with my thoughts wasn't much better. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "It's Mrs. Harrington from Evergreen Gardens. Can we meet tomorrow? I have a proposal that might interest you." Curious, I agreed to meet her for coffee in Portland the next afternoon. What could the venue coordinator possibly want with me now that the wedding was cancelled and the financial responsibilities sorted? I spent the remainder of the day walking along the beach, stopping occasionally to watch surfers battle the Pacific waves. There was something therapeutic about seeing them wipe out again and again, only to paddle back out for another attempt. Persistence in the face of failure. Getting back up after being knocked down. It felt like a metaphor I needed right then. That night, I dreamed of Jessica. Not the betrayal, but earlier times. Her laugh as we cooked dinner in my apartment, the way her copper hair caught the sunlight, her excitement when describing ideas for events she was planning. I woke feeling hollow. The dream memories more painful than nightmares would have been. Reality is a cruel teacher, but an effective one. In the harsh light of morning, I knew that despite the hurt, I had made the right decision. The woman I loved had never really existed. Or at least, she wasn't the complete picture. The real Jessica had been capable of sustained deception, of betraying me with the person I trusted most. That wasn't something I could forgive, no matter how much. I missed the version of her I had constructed in my mind. I checked out of the motel and drove back to Portland, stopping at a storage facility on the way to rent a small unit. Whatever of Jessica's remained in my apartment would go there until she could collect it. I wouldn't have her things around. When I returned from New Zealand, Mrs. Harrington was waiting at a coffee shop near the Pearl District when I arrived, elegant as ever in a tailored suit despite the casual setting. She stood when she saw me, extending her hand with a surprisingly warm smile. "Mr. Mitchell, thank you for meeting me." We exchanged pleasantries as the barista brought our orders, an Americano for her, plain black coffee for me. Once we were settled, she got straight to the point. "I've been running Evergreen Gardens for 27 years, she began. "In that time, I've seen over 1,000 weddings and nearly 200 cancellations." I raised an eyebrow, surprised at the statistic. "Cold feet, family drama, financial issues," she explained. "But your situation was unique, and your handling of it was impressively controlled." "Thank you," I said, unsure where this was going, "but I'm not sure why." "I have a proposition for you," she interrupted, pulling a folder from her briefcase. "As you know, the contract Mr. Cooper signed makes him responsible for the full venue fee, even though the event won't take place. This means the estate still gets paid, but it also means we have a fully staffed, fully catered event space with no event this Saturday." Understanding dawned. "You want to rebook the venue?" She nodded. "Exactly. Now, normally we'd simply consider this a windfall. Payment without having to host an event is good business. But I have another couple whose venue cancelled on them last minute due to flooding. They're desperate, willing to pay a premium for a last-minute booking. And this concerns me because—" Mrs. Harrington slid the folder toward me. "If you'll sign a release allowing us to rebook the venue, we can accommodate this couple. You would retain the majority of Mr. Cooper's payment as damages, while allowing us to earn additional revenue from the new booking." Everyone wins, except Mr. Cooper, of course. I opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. The proposal was straightforward. Ryan would still owe the full amount to me as damages, but Evergreen Gardens would be free to book another event in the time slot. They would refund a small portion of the fee to offset any appearance of double dipping, but the bulk of Ryan's payment would still be mine. "Why offer this?" I asked, genuinely curious. "You could just take his money and book the new couple anyway. Double the revenue." Mrs. Harrington's lips thinned slightly. "I've built my business on reputation, Mr. Mitchell. That includes a reputation for fair dealing, even in difficult circumstances. Besides," she added, her eyes twinkling slightly, "I've found that good karma tends to be good business in the long run." I studied her for a moment, then signed the release. It didn't really change anything for me financially, but it felt good to participate in something positive coming out of this mess. A couple who needed a venue getting their dream wedding, after all. As we stood to leave, Mrs. Harrington paused. "If I may say so, Mr. Mitchell, you've conducted yourself with remarkable dignity throughout this ordeal. That speaks to your character." "Thank you," I said, surprised by the compliment. "Though I'm not sure revenge via contract enforcement qualifies as dignified," she laughed softly. "Justice and vengeance aren't always different things, Mr. Mitchell. It's the execution that matters." As I walked back to my car, her words echoed in my mind. The execution that matters. I had chosen to enforce a contract rather than create a scene, to use legal means rather than public humiliation, to walk away rather than beg someone to stay who clearly didn't want to be there fully. Perhaps there was dignity in that choice after all. Back at my apartment, I faced the daunting task of boxing up Jessica's belongings. She'd moved in gradually over our relationship, her possessions mingling with mine until the space felt wholly shared. Now I had to disentangle her life from mine, one object at a time. Her clothes were easy. I simply emptied her side of the closet into suitcases. The shared items were harder. Who kept the coffee maker we'd bought together? The framed photos from our trip to San Francisco, the ridiculous ceramic parrot we'd found at a flea market and named Gerald. In the end, I was more generous than she deserved, keeping only what I had owned before we met and a few jointly purchased necessities. Everything else went into boxes labeled with her name, ready for the storage unit. I wouldn't be the bitter ex who fought over kitchenware. As I sealed the final box, I found her engagement ring on the bathroom counter, a vintage emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds that had belonged to my grandmother. She must have left it there the morning after I confronted her. I held it up to the light, watching the stones catch and scatter the afternoon sun across the walls. So much history in such a small object. So many hopes. I slipped it into my pocket, not sure yet what to do with it. Selling it felt wrong. Keeping it felt masochistic. Another decision for another day. With Jessica's things packed away, I turned my attention to my own packing for New Zealand. The itinerary we'd planned had been a compromise between her desire for luxury and my preference for adventure. Boutique hotels interspersed with hiking excursions and adrenaline activities like bungee jumping and zip lining. Now that I was traveling alone, I revamped the schedule, canceling the wine tours she'd insisted on and adding more hiking days. I booked a multi-day wilderness trek that I'd originally suggested, but that Jessica had vetoed as too rustic. For the first time, I felt a flicker of excitement about the trip. My phone rang as I was researching camping equipment rental options. My mother's name flashed on the screen. "Daniel," she said when I answered, her voice warm with concern. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay, Mom. Better than expected, actually." Olivia told me everything. That girl, my mother rarely swore, but she made an exception for Jessica, delivering a scathing assessment of her character that would have made a sailor blush. "And that friend of yours, after all you did for him, It's been a week, I acknowledged, surprised at my own understatement. Are you still going on the trip? Olivia mentioned you might. Yeah, flight leaves Monday morning. I've reworked the itinerary a bit. There was a pause. Alone? That's the plan. Another pause. I'm proud of you, Daniel. Not everyone would have the strength to do that. Her words warmed something in me that had been cold for days. Thanks, Mom. That means a lot. When you get back, come visit for a few days. The guest room is yours, whenever you need it. I promised I would, then filled her in on some of the practical details, the apartment, the storage unit, the legal paperwork. Throughout it all, she listened without interrupting, offering support without platitudes. It was exactly what I needed. After we hung up, I returned to my packing with renewed determination. This trip wouldn't be what I had planned, but maybe it would be something better, a chance to rediscover who I was when I wasn't defined by my relationship with Jessica, a chance to remember what I wanted, what I enjoyed, what made me come alive. As night fell, I stood on my apartment balcony, looking out at the Portland skyline. Somewhere out there, Jessica and Ryan were dealing with the consequences of their choices. Ryan was figuring out how to pay a massive venue fee for a wedding. That never happened. Jessica was coming to terms with the fact that her betrayal had cost her a future she'd claimed to want. I found I didn't really care anymore what they were doing or feeling. Their story was no longer mine. Tomorrow, I would finish packing. Sunday, I would drop the keys to my storage unit with Tim, who had volunteered to coordinate with Jessica for pickup of her things. Monday, I would board a plane to the other side of the world, alone but unburdened. The future stretched before me, unwritten and full of possibility. For the first time since finding those text messages, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, not yet, but the possibility of it, waiting on the horizon like the promise of dawn after a long night. The 14-hour flight to Auckland gave me too much time to think. Despite upgrading to premium economy with some of the money saved from cancelling Jessica's ticket, sleep eluded me. I alternated between staring out the window at endless darkness and flipping through the in-flight entertainment system without settling on anything. Somewhere over the Pacific, a strange thought struck me. This was the first time in 3 years that I'd been completely untethered from both Jessica and Ryan. No text messages, no emails, no social media updates. Just me, suspended between continents, between my old life and whatever came next. When we finally landed in Auckland, early morning sunlight streamed through the terminal windows. I collected my luggage, cleared customs, and stepped outside into air that smelled different, fresher somehow, with undertones of salt and vegetation I couldn't name. A taxi took me to the boutique hotel in the city centre where Jessica and I'd planned to recover from our jet lag before starting our adventure. The desk clerk glanced at my reservation. "Mitchell party of 2? Is your wife joining you later?" "Just me," I replied, the words becoming easier with practice. Plans changed. If he noticed the flash of gold as I slipped my grandmother's ring from my pocket and buried it deep in my carry-on, he was professional enough not to comment. My room overlooked the harbour, sailboats gliding across water so blue it seemed artificially enhanced. I unpacked methodically, hanging shirts in the closet meant for 2 people's clothing, arranging toiletries on one side of a double vanity. The emptiness of the room felt oppressive, a constant reminder of absence. I showered, changed clothes, and immediately left the hotel. Standing still felt dangerous, like quicksand that might pull me under if I didn't keep moving. Auckland welcomed me with its blend of urban energy and laid-back island attitude. I wandered without purpose, following streets uphill and down, stopping occasionally to read historical plaques or examine shop windows. When hunger finally registered, I found a small cafe and ordered coffee and a sandwich, sitting at an outdoor table where I could watch people pass by. Couples walking hand in hand, Families herding excited children, friends laughing over shared jokes, everyone connected to someone else while I sat alone, nursing bitter coffee and trying not to feel sorry for myself. My phone buzzed. A text from Olivia checking that I'd arrived safely. I sent her a photo of the harbour and assured her I was fine. The lie came easily, a social convention we all employ when the truth is too complicated or too raw to share. That first day passed in a haze of jet lag and disorientation. I returned to the hotel early evening and fell into dreamless sleep, my body finally surrendering to exhaustion. The next morning brought clarity and a decision. I would not waste this trip feeling sorry for myself. Jessica and Ryan had already taken enough from me. They wouldn't take New Zealand too. I consulted the revised itinerary I'd created and headed to the hotel lobby to meet the guide for my first excursion, a day trip to Waiheke Island for hiking and wine tasting. Originally, this had been scheduled for later in the trip, but I'd moved it forward, eager to escape the city. The guide, a weathered Kiwi named Mac with sun-creased eyes and an impressive salt and pepper beard, greeted me with a firm handshake. "Just you today, mate?" The booking said 2. "Change of plans," I replied, the now familiar explanation requiring no elaboration. He nodded, unperturbed. "Right then. More wine for us." The ferry to Waiheke cut through pristine waters, leaving Auckland's skyline behind. I stood at the rail, letting sea spray mist my face, and remembered how Jessica had insisted we book a private boat tour instead of taking the public ferry. "It's our honeymoon, Danny. We should do it right." Another demand that had seemed reasonable, through the lens of love, but now struck me as entitled and unnecessary. Waiheke revealed itself as a paradise of rolling hills, olive groves and vineyards stretching to dramatic coastal cliffs. Mac led me on a trek along the island's northeastern peninsula, pointing out native plants and birds with a naturalist's enthusiasm. The physical exertion felt good, heart pumping, muscles working, mind focused on the path ahead rather than the path behind. After hiking, we visited 3 boutique wineries, sampling local varietals while Mac shared stories about each estate's history. At the second winery, an outdoor table with 2 Australian couples had an empty chair. "Join us, mate," one of the men called when he noticed me standing alone with my wine flight. "No point drinking alone when there's conversation to be had." I hesitated, then accepted the invitation. They were on holiday from Sydney. David and Elaine, Mark and Jennifer, 2 couples in their 40s, celebrating milestone anniversaries with a joint trip. 20 years for one couple, 15 for the other. "What brings you to New Zealand?" Jennifer asked as I settled in with my wine. The question I'd been dreading. I considered lying, inventing a business trip or solo adventure. Instead, I heard myself saying, "I'm on what was supposed to be my honeymoon. Without the bride." Silence fell over the table. David cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mate, that's rough." "What happened, if you don't mind me asking?" Elaine said, her voice gentle. I gave them the abbreviated version: fiancé, best friend, betrayal, venue, contract, drama. As I spoke, I realized it was the first time I'd told the full story to strangers, people with no connection to my life in Portland. The words came more easily than expected, clinical and detached, as if describing something that had happened to someone else. When I finished, Mark raised his glass. "To new beginnings." The others joined the toast, and I felt something shift inside me, a small knot loosening. These people didn't know me, didn't know Jessica or Ryan. They had no stake in my story. No reason to take sides or offer platitudes. Their simple acknowledgement of my situation without judgment felt unexpectedly healing. We spent the remainder of the afternoon together, conversation flowing as easily as the wine. They shared stories of their own relationship challenges, a rough patch during Elaine's postpartum depression, Mark's workaholic years that nearly ended their marriage, Jennifer's health scare that had forced a re-evaluation of priorities. Real. Stories from real marriages, not the Instagram perfect version I'd constructed with Jessica. The secret isn't finding someone perfect, David said, as we waited for the ferry back to Auckland. It's finding someone who's committed to working through the imperfect moments together. His words stayed with me that evening as I ate dinner, alone in my hotel room, scrolling through photos from the day's excursion. Jessica hadn't been committed to working through anything together. At the first sign of trouble, or more likely the first sign of excitement elsewhere, she'd turned to Ryan. Maybe I'd had a lucky escape after all. The next day, I checked out of the Auckland hotel and picked up my rental car, a compact SUV, perfect for the solo road trip I'd mapped out. The original honeymoon plan had us flying directly to Queenstown for the South Island portion of our trip. But my revised itinerary included a meandering drive down the North Island first. I headed south with windows down and music loud, the road unfurling before me like a promise. The landscapes shifted from urban to pastoral, rolling hills dotted with sheep so numerous they looked like clouds fallen to earth. When hunger struck, I pulled over at roadside fruit stands, sampling local apples and kiwi fruit sweeter than any I'd tasted at home. By late afternoon, I reached Tongariro National Park, dominated by 3 massive volcanoes rising from ancient lava fields. I checked into a rustic lodge at the edge of the park, surrounded by other hikers and outdoor enthusiasts. The communal dining room buzzed with conversations in a dozen languages, everyone comparing notes on trails and weather conditions for the next day's adventures. I found myself drawn into a conversation with a group of German hikers planning to tackle the Tongariro Alpine Crossing, a challenging day hike across active volcanic terrain that had been on my wish list for years. Jessica had vetoed it in our planning stages, concerned about the difficulty level and the fact that it would mess up her hair for subsequent vacation photos. "You should join us," suggested Lucas, their unofficial leader. "The weather forecast is perfect and we're starting at dawn." Without Jessica's objections to consider, I immediately agreed. That night I repacked my day pack with hiking essentials and set my alarm for 4:30 a.m., feeling a surge of anticipation I hadn't experienced since this whole wedding debacle began. The Tongariro crossing lived up to its reputation as one of the world's greatest day hikes. We ascended through volcanic moonscapes, past emerald lakes that glowed an impossible green from mineral deposits, and gazed down into a perfectly formed crater that steamed ominously. Every vista seemed designed to make human concerns feel insignificant. What did my broken engagement matter to mountains that had weathered millennia? Near the halfway point, we reached the highest elevation of the track, where fierce winds whipped across an exposed ridge. The Germans huddled together for a group photo, then offered to take one of me. "Your family will want to see where you've been," Lucas explained, reaching for my phone. I struck a triumphant pose at the summit, arms raised in victory against the backdrop of volcanic splendor. When Lucas handed back my phone, I found myself wondering who I would share these photos with. Not Jessica, not Ryan, my mother and Olivia certainly. Tim, maybe. But my circle suddenly seemed smaller without the 2 people who had featured most prominently in it for years. The descent was harder on my knees than I'd anticipated, and by the time we reached the end of the track, every muscle in my body protested. Yet I felt more alive than I had in weeks. The physical challenge had pushed thoughts of Jessica and Ryan to the background, giving me hours of respite from the mental loop of betrayal and regret. That night, muscles aching pleasantly from exertion, I soaked in the lodge's outdoor hot tub beneath a canopy of stars, unlike anything visible from light-polluted Portland. The Milky Way stretched across the sky, a river of stars so dense they merged into luminous clouds. I tried to identify constellations, but quickly gave up. Content, simply to float and stare upward, letting the vast indifference of the universe put my problems in perspective. A voice broke my reverie. "Mind if I join you?" A woman about my age stood at the edge of the tub, wrapped in a towel. In the dim lighting, I could make out dark hair piled on top of her head and the glint of metal-framed glasses. "It's a free country," I replied, immediately wincing at how unwelcoming that sounded. "I mean, yes, plenty of room." She slipped into the water with an appreciative sigh. "I did the crossing today. Every muscle I own is currently filing formal complaints." "Same," I admitted. "Worth it, though. Absolutely." She settled on the opposite side of the tub. "I'm Sophie, by the way, from Melbourne." "Daniel, Portland, Oregon or Maine?" "Oregon." "Nice. I spent a semester at Reed College years ago. Beautiful city." We fell into easy conversation about hiking trails and travel experiences. Sophie was a marine biologist doing research along Australia's Great Barrier Reef, taking a well-earned break after months of fieldwork. She spoke about coral bleaching and reef ecosystems with the same passion I felt discussing sustainable architecture, her hands making animated gestures that sent ripples across the water's surface. Eventually, the conversation turned personal. "Traveling alone?" she asked. I hesitated only briefly before telling her the abbreviated version of my situation. To my surprise, she laughed. "Sorry," she said, seeing my expression. "I'm not laughing at your pain. It's just I'm in almost the exact same situation. My fiancé decided 2 months before our wedding that he wasn't ready for commitment and needed to find himself. Turned out finding himself involved finding my research assistant in his bed. Ouch. Yeah. So I kept the honeymoon bookings and came anyway. Best decision I've made in years." We compared notes on our respective heartbreaks, finding dark humor in the similarities. Sophie had also pursued financial justice, in her case keeping the entirety of their joint savings since she'd contributed most of it while her ex was between jobs. "He actually had the nerve to ask for his half when he left," she said, incredulous, as if cheating entitled him to a parting gift. The audacity of unfaithful people never ceases to amaze me, I agreed. We stayed in the hot tub until our fingers pruned, talking about everything and nothing. Sophie was intelligent, witty, and refreshingly direct. When we finally admitted the water had cooled too much for comfort, she suggested continuing our conversation over a nightcap in the lodge's small bar. One drink turned into 2, our conversation ranging from architecture to marine conservation to the best novels we'd read recently. Around midnight, the bartender gave last call, and we reluctantly settled our tabs. Outside her door, Sophie paused. "I'm heading to Wellington tomorrow. You?" "Same, actually, taking the scenic route down to the ferry." "Any interest in carpooling? Save on gas, share the driving." The invitation surprised me. We'd just met, and yet the prospect of sharing the journey with her felt right in a way I couldn't articulate. "That sounds great," I said. "I was planning to stop at some viewpoints along the way, if you don't mind." "Perfect. I love scenic detours." She smiled, then added, "Just to be clear, I'm not hitting on you." "Well, maybe I am, but I'm not expecting anything. We're both recovering from relationship disasters, and I'm genuinely just enjoying your company." Her candor was refreshing after months of Jessica's hidden agendas and half-truths. I appreciate the clarity, and for what it's worth, I'm enjoying your company too. We arranged to meet after breakfast, and I returned to my room with a lighter step than I'd had in weeks. As I packed for the next day's journey, I realized I hadn't checked my email or thought about Portland in hours. The distance, both physical and emotional, was working its magic. Sophie proved to be an ideal travel companion, easygoing about stops, willing to take the wheel when my arms tired, and full of fascinating commentary about the landscapes we passed. We detoured to hidden beaches and scenic overlooks not mentioned in my guidebook, sharing driving playlists that revealed surprisingly compatible musical tastes. By the time we reached Wellington 2 days later, I felt as if I'd known her for years rather than days. We checked into separate hotels. She had a reservation at a harbourfront boutique hotel, while I'd booked a more budget-friendly option near the museum district. "Plans for tonight?" she asked as we parted outside her hotel. "I was thinking of checking out that restaurant you mentioned, the one with the seafood platter. Ortega Fish Shack? It's supposed to be amazing." She hesitated, then added, "Want company. No pressure if you're enjoying solo time." I realized I'd had enough solo time. Company would be great. Dinner that night felt dangerously like a date. Candlelight, excellent wine, conversation that flowed effortlessly. Sophie wore a simple black dress that transformed her from the practical hiker I'd met into someone altogether more intriguing. We lingered over dessert, neither of us eager for the evening to end. "What's next on your itinerary?" she asked. As we walked along the waterfront afterward, city lights reflecting in the harbour. Ferry to the South Island tomorrow, then working my way down to Queenstown. Some adventure activities booked there, bungee jumping, jet boating, that sort of thing. You? "I'm staying in Wellington a few more days for a marine conservation conference, then flying directly to Queenstown for some hiking around Milford Sound." A crazy impulse seized me. "Maybe we could meet up in Queenstown, if our schedules align." She smiled. "I'd like that." Outside her hotel, she kissed me. Not on the cheek as I expected, but a proper kiss that caught me completely off guard. When she pulled back, her expression was a mix of mischief and uncertainty. "Too soon?" she asked. "Maybe, probably." I ran a hand through my hair, conflicted. "I like you, Sophie, but I'm not sure what I'm ready for." "Fair enough." She wasn't offended. "Consider it a promissory note, then. Redeemable when you're ready, if you ever are. No expiration date." The next morning she saw me off at the ferry terminal with another kiss, on the cheek this time, and a promise to text when she reached Queenstown. As the ferry pulled away from Wellington Harbour, I watched her figure grow smaller, a strange mixture of emotions churning in my chest. I wasn't ready for a new relationship. The wound Jessica had left was still too fresh, too painful. And yet, Sophie represented something I hadn't expected to find on this trip, a reminder that connections were still possible, that one betrayal didn't doom me to permanent solitude. The journey across Cook Strait offered dramatic views of coastlines and open ocean. I stood on deck, letting the wind clear my head, and thought about parallel lives. In one, I was on this same ferry with Jessica, probably taking selfies and planning our South Island adventures. In another, I never discovered her betrayal and married her anyway, building a life on a foundation of lies. In this life, the real one, I was alone but strangely hopeful. The path ahead was unmapped, uncertain, and entirely mine to determine. The South Island welcomed me with mountains that made Oregon's Cascades look like foothills. I collected my rental car in Picton and began the drive toward Kaikoura, where I'd booked a whale-watching excursion. The coastal road hugged cliffs that plunged directly into the sea, every turn revealing views more spectacular than the last. In Kaikoura, I checked into a small bed and breakfast run by a cheerful Maori couple who immediately adopted me into their extended family. They insisted I join them for dinner, serving fresh-caught crayfish that gave the town its name and telling stories of the 2016 earthquake that had reshaped the coastline. "The sea floor rose nearly 2 meters," George explained, gesturing with weathered hands. "Created new land right out of the ocean. Changed everything for the marine life, for the town, for us." "How do you rebuild after something like that?" I asked, thinking not just of earthquakes, but of all the ways life can suddenly, dramatically change. His wife, Aroha, answered, "You start with what remains. You honor what was lost, then you build something new that honors both. Their wisdom, offered casually over seafood and local wine, struck me as profound. Start with what remains. My career, my friends, the real ones, my family, honor what was lost, the relationship I thought I had, the trust I'd given freely, the future I'd planned, then build something new. The next morning, I joined a small group on a boat heading out to deep water where sperm whales hunted in submarine canyons. The sea was choppy, the sky overcast, and several tourists immediately succumbed to seasickness. I found my sea legs, quickly positioning myself at the bow where the captain's commentary was clearest. 2 hours into the excursion, after several false alarms, the call went up, "Whale 3 o'clock." The massive creature surfaced in a spray of mist, its dark back breaching the waves like a submarine. The distinctive rectangular head was unmistakable. A male sperm whale, over 15 meters long, resting at the surface between deep hunting dives. We watched in reverent silence as the whale breathed, massive tail occasionally breaking the surface as it adjusted position. There was something humbling about witnessing such an enormous, ancient creature going about its business, completely indifferent to our presence. Eventually, the whale prepared to dive. It arched its back, raised its massive fluke high above the water, then slipped beneath the surface with surprising grace for something so large. The captain explained it would descend over a kilometer deep, hunting giant squid in darkness we could barely imagine, before returning to the surface in about 45 minutes. As we headed back to harbor, I thought about what George had said the night before. The whale's world had been transformed by the earthquake. Its hunting grounds altered, landmarks shifted, yet it adapted, continuing its ancient patterns in the new topography. Life persisted, finding its way forward despite radical change. Maybe I could learn something from that whale, from George and Aroha, from Sophie. Maybe moving forward wasn't about forgetting or even forgiving, but simply about continuing to live, to adapt, to find joy in the changed landscape of my life. For the first time since discovering those damning text messages on Jessica's phone, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, not yet, but the certainty that happiness would eventually return in forms I couldn't yet imagine. I took out my phone and did something I'd been avoiding since landing in New Zealand. I opened Instagram and posted a photo, not of myself, but of the whale's fluke disappearing beneath the waves, a perfect goodbye. The caption read simply, "Some endings are also beginnings." The South Island of New Zealand seemed designed for healing. As I drove south from Kaikoura toward Christchurch, mountains towered on my left, while the Pacific stretched endlessly on my right. The road wound between them like a compromise, offering views of both without fully committing to either. I found myself pulling over frequently, not just to photograph the scenery, but to simply exist within it, letting the majesty of the landscape dwarf my personal troubles. In Christchurch, I wandered through a city still reinventing itself after devastating earthquakes. The resilience was evident everywhere. Pop-up shops in colorful shipping containers, innovative architecture incorporating the ruins of the old cathedral, public art installations celebrating renewal. It felt symbolic, this place that had been broken but refused to be defined by its tragedy. I stayed 2 nights in a boutique hotel converted from an old government building. On my second evening, I received a text from Sophie. Arrived in Queenstown early, weather perfect, mountains ridiculous. Still want to meet up? With it, she sent a photo of herself silhouetted against a stunning alpine backdrop, arms outstretched. In a gesture of wonder, something in my chest loosened at the sight. I replied immediately, "Absolutely. I'll be there in 3 days. Save some mountains for me." My journey continued through the heart of the South Island, across golden plains and over dramatic mountain passes. I stopped in Lake Tekapo, where turquoise waters reflected snow-capped peaks and the night sky blazed with stars in a designated dark sky reserve. The Church of the Good Shepherd, a tiny stone building framed against lake and mountains, drew tourists by day, but I returned at midnight, sitting alone on a nearby rock as the Milky Way wheeled overhead. In that moment of cosmic perspective, the Jessica situation seemed suddenly small, a painful chapter in a much longer story, but not the defining narrative of my life. I took out my grandmother's ring, which I'd been carrying in my pocket since Auckland, and studied it in the starlight. The emerald caught the light differently here, its green depths holding mysteries rather than memories. I thought about what to do with it. Selling it felt wrong somehow, disrespectful to both my grandmother's memory and the genuineness of what I'd felt for Jessica, regardless of her betrayal. Keeping it seemed masochistic. Giving it to another woman someday felt impossible to imagine. After long consideration, I walked to the edge of the lake, where small waves lapped against rounded stones. I cocked my arm, prepared to throw the ring into the depths, a dramatic gesture of release, but stopped mid-motion. This wasn't a movie, and symbolic gestures wouldn't magically heal my heart. Besides, the ring was my family's history. Jessica hadn't earned the right to disconnect me from that. I slipped it back into my pocket and returned to my hotel, no closer to resolution, but somehow lighter just for having confronted the question. The next day, I drove through increasingly dramatic mountain scenery toward Queenstown. The road hugged Lake Pukaki, its impossible blue, a result of glacial flour suspended in the water. Mount Cook, New Zealand's highest peak, dominated the horizon, its snow-covered summit piercing low-hanging clouds. I stopped at a viewpoint and took a selfie with the mountain range behind me, sending it to Sophie with the caption, "Almost there, save me some adventure." Her reply came quickly. "Plenty of adventure to go around. I've booked us a table at Rata for tomorrow night. Dress nice. We're celebrating." Celebrating what, I wondered, but didn't ask. It felt good to have something to look forward to, a fixed point in the uncertain terrain I'd been navigating since discovering Jessica's betrayal. I reached Queenstown by late afternoon, checking into the modern apartment I'd rented overlooking Lake Wakatipu. Originally, this was meant to be the luxury portion of our honeymoon, a spacious one-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows and a private balcony where Jessica and I would toast our marriage against a backdrop of the Remarkables. Mountain range. Now the apartment felt cavernous, its king bed and double vanity bathroom emphasizing my solitude rather than alleviating it. Still, I unpacked carefully, hanging shirts and slacks in the closet, arranging toiletries with architectural precision. Order on the outside sometimes helped create order within. I showered away the day's travels, dressed in clean clothes, and headed into town to explore. Queenstown hummed with energy, a resort town fueled by adrenaline and spectacular scenery. Adventure operators lined the streets, offering every conceivable way to test your courage. Bungee jumping, skydiving, canyon swinging, jet boating. Restaurants and bars catered to hungry thrill seekers, while luxury boutiques served the more affluent tourists. The mix shouldn't have worked, but somehow did, creating a vibrant atmosphere unlike anywhere else I'd been. I found a craft brewery with outdoor seating overlooking the lake and ordered a flight of local beers. As I sampled them, I checked my phone for the first time in hours. 3 new messages waited. One from Olivia, asking how the trip was going. One from Sophie, confirming dinner plans for the following evening, and one from an unknown number. I opened that one last, suspecting what I'd find. Ryan. Daniel, got your new number from Tim. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I'm desperate. The venue payment is destroying me financially. Please reconsider. I've lost my best friend. Don't make me lose my home, too. My hand tightened around the phone. How dare he? After everything, he still believed he deserved mercy, consideration, a reprieve from consequences. I started to type an angry response, then stopped, deleted it, and simply blocked the number. I had no obligation to engage with his self-pity or to ease the burden he'd created for himself. The next morning, I woke early for my scheduled bungee jump at the Kawarau Bridge, the world's first commercial bungee operation. As the shuttle drove me and other jumpers to the site, nervous energy filled the van. A young British couple held hands tightly, periodically bursting into anxious laughter. A muscular Australian man boasted about other extreme sports he'd conquered, his bravado clearly masking fear. Two Japanese students recorded everything on GoPros mounted to their helmets, whispering excitedly to each other. I sat quietly, watching the scenery pass, wondering why I wasn't more nervous. Heights had always made me uncomfortable, yet the prospect of hurling myself off a bridge seemed almost welcome today, a controlled fall into the unknown. At the jump site, we were weighed, harnessed, and given safety briefings. I watched others jump before me, their screams echoing off the canyon walls as they plummeted toward the turquoise river below. When my turn came, I walked calmly to the edge of the platform, looking down at the water 43 meters below. "Ready?" asked the jumpmaster, a tanned Kiwi with weather-beaten skin. I thought about Jessica, about Ryan, about broken trust and shattered plans. "Ready," I confirmed. 3, 2, 1, bungee! I didn't hesitate, diving forward into empty space, arms outstretched. For a crystalline moment, I was falling, truly falling, gravity the only force acting upon me. Then the cord caught, rebounding me skyward in a controlled bounce that sent blood rushing to my head and a whoop of exhilaration from my lungs. As I dangled above the river, waiting for the retrieval boat, an unexpected peace settled over me. The free fall had lasted only seconds, but in that brief surrender to gravity, I'd felt something essential shift. I'd jumped, terrified but willing, into emptiness, and I'd survived. More than survived, I'd experienced a pure, uncomplicated joy that had nothing to do with Jessica or Ryan or my old life. Maybe that's what moving forward looked like. Not a deliberate forgetting, but a series of new experiences that gradually created their own gravity, their own center of emotional mass, until the old pain was simply one planet in a larger solar system rather than the sun around which everything orbited. Back in Queenstown, buzzing with post-adrenaline energy, I wandered the botanic gardens until my dinner with Sophie. I changed into my one good outfit, dark jeans and a blue button-down shirt I'd packed for nicer restaurants, and arrived at Rata precisely on time. Sophie was already seated, wearing a simple emerald dress that set off her dark hair and made me momentarily breathless. She stood to greet me, kissing my cheek with casual affection. "You look nice," she said, gesturing to my outfit, almost like a proper date. "You look beautiful," I replied, meaning it. "What are we celebrating?" She waited until we'd ordered drinks to explain. Two things. First, I got the research grant I applied for. 3 years of fully funded study on climate change impacts, on reef systems. That's fantastic. I was genuinely happy for her. "Congratulations." "Thank you." She beamed, clearly thrilled. It's career-making, the kind of opportunity marine biologists dream about. "And the second celebration?" I prompted. 1 week of freedom," she said, raising her glass. 7 days since I would have been married to a man who didn't deserve me. 7 days of choosing myself instead. We clinked glasses. "To freedom," I echoed, the word tasting sweeter than the local Pinot Noir. Throughout dinner, I found myself studying Sophie when she wasn't looking. The animated way she described her research plans, the slight furrow between her brows when considering menu options, the easy laugh that seemed to start deep in her chest. She was nothing like Jessica, less polished, more authentic, her enthusiasm for life evident in every gesture. "What?" she asked, catching me watching her. Nothing, I said. Just enjoying the company. Her smile turned contemplative. This is odd, isn't it? Meeting when we did, both of us processing similar betrayals, statistically improbable. Indeed, maybe the universe has a twisted sense of humor, I suggested, or a sense of balance, things taken, things given. After dinner, we walked along the lakefront, the night air crisp with approaching autumn. Lights from restaurants and hotels reflected on the dark water, competing with stars above. We found a quiet bench and sat close, not quite touching, but aware of each other's warmth. "I like you, Daniel," Sophie said eventually, her directness both startling and refreshing. "More than I expected to like someone right now." "I like you too," I admitted. "It's confusing." "Because of Jessica?"
Partly.
"And partly because I don't live in Melbourne, and you don't live in Portland, and we're both here temporarily." She nodded, acknowledging the practical reality. Long distance rarely works, especially starting from scratch. "And I'm not sure what I have to offer right now," I added. "I'm still sorting through everything." "I'm not asking for promises," she said softly, "or plans, just honesty. Honesty I can do." I looked out at the lake, gathering my thoughts. "I'm attracted to you. I enjoy your company more than I've enjoyed anyone's in a long time, and I'm terrified of making another mistake." She took my hand, her fingers cool against my palm. "What if we just agree to be here now, in this place at this time, with no expectations beyond Queenstown?" The proposition was tempting in its simplicity. A vacation connection. Intense but temporary, with clear boundaries and no ambiguity. No future to worry about, no past to overcome, just the present moment to experience fully. "I'd like that," I said finally, turning to face her. She leaned forward and kissed me, not the tentative kiss of Wellington, but something more certain. I responded without the hesitation I'd felt before, my hands finding her waist as hers slid around my neck. When we broke apart, a group of passing tourists whistled and applauded, making Sophie laugh and bury her face against my shoulder. The moment was ridiculous and perfect. Strangers cheering for a connection they knew nothing about, Sophie's laughter vibrating against my chest, the night air sharp in my lungs. "Your place or mine?" she asked, looking up at me with a mixture of desire and amusement. The question brought me back to reality. I'm not sure I'm ready for that." Her expression softened. "Too soon?" "Maybe." I searched for words. "To explain. It's not that I don't want to, it's just I haven't been with anyone but Jessica in 3 years. It feels like a bigger step than I'm prepared for tonight." Instead of disappointment, Sophie's face showed understanding. "I respect that. Honestly, I'm not sure I'm ready either. It just seemed like the thing to say in the moment." She grinned. "Very cinematic." Relief washed over me. "Rain check?" "Rain check," she agreed. "Meanwhile, I'm staying an extra day to hike Ben Lomond. Want to join?" "I'd love to." Walking her back to her hotel, hand in hand under a sky brilliant with unfamiliar southern stars, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced since before discovering Jessica's betrayal. Not happiness exactly. That seemed too simple a word for the complex emotional landscape I inhabited, but a sense of possibility, of life continuing to offer beauty and connection even after devastation. The Ben Lomond hike the next day proved more challenging than either of us had anticipated. The trail climbed relentlessly from Queenstown's lakeshore up through pine forests, then above the tree line into tussock grasslands, and finally up a steep, rocky saddle to the summit at 1,748 meters. We started early, but still found ourselves racing the afternoon weather, clouds building ominously as we made the final push to the peak. "Worth it," Sophie gasped when we finally reached the top, turning slowly to take in the 360-degree panorama of lakes, mountains, and valleys stretching to the horizon. I couldn't speak, partly from exertion but mostly from awe. The landscape below us seemed impossibly vast and complex, layer upon layer of mountain ranges in deepening shades of blue, glacial valleys cutting between them, lakes reflecting the changing sky. Human presence was barely visible from this height, reduced to tiny clusters of buildings that seemed as natural and temporary as bird nests. We found a sheltered spot for lunch, sharing the sandwiches and fruit we'd packed that morning. The wind whipped Sophie's hair around her face as she pointed out geographical features, her scientific mind cataloguing and explaining even as she marveled. The lakes were carved by ancient glaciers, she explained between bites of apple. During the last ice age, this entire landscape was buried under ice kilometers thick. When it retreated, it left these perfect U-shaped valleys. Everything we're looking at is the result of catastrophic change, I observed. Destruction that created something beautiful. She caught my eye, understanding the parallel. Nature's good at that. Volcanic eruptions create fertile soil. Forest fires clear deadwood so new growth can flourish. Coastlines erode and reform. Are you saying betrayal is natural? I asked, not offended, but curious about her perspective. No, she replied thoughtfully. I'm saying transformation is. And sometimes catastrophe forces transformation we might have avoided otherwise. The wisdom in her words struck me deeply. Would I have left Jessica eventually, even without discovering her affair? Our relationship had problems before Ryan entered the picture, her controlling tendencies, my conflict avoidance, our different priorities. The betrayal had forced a clean break rather than a slow dissolution, painful but perhaps ultimately merciful. Thunder rumbled in the distance, interrupting my thoughts. Dark clouds were moving in faster than expected, the temperature dropping as they approached. We should head down, Sophie said, already packing up our lunch remnants. Alpine storms get dangerous quickly. We barely made it below the tree line before the storm hit, rain lashing sideways and thunder shaking the mountainside. We took shelter under a dense stand of pines, huddling together as water dripped through the canopy. Above, Sophie was laughing, eyes bright with excitement. Nothing like a little danger to make you feel alive. Her enthusiasm was contagious. I found myself laughing too, water running down my face, my expensive hiking jacket proving inadequate against the alpine deluge. We were soaked, cold, miles from shelter, and somehow it was exhilarating rather than miserable. On impulse, I pulled her close and kissed her, tasting rain and adventure on her lips. She responded eagerly, her body warm against mine despite our wet clothes, her hands tangling in my hair. When the kiss ended, she looked up at me with a mix of desire and amusement. Changed your mind about that rain check? I laughed, resting, my forehead against hers. Maybe, but perhaps somewhere drier. Definitely somewhere drier. The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving the forest steaming in afternoon sunlight. We made our way down the mountain in companionable silence, occasionally pointing out wildlife or particularly beautiful views, but mostly content to be present in the moment together. That evening, after hot showers and dry clothes, I made dinner in my apartment while Sophie opened wine and set up music on her portable speaker. It felt strangely domestic. This sharing of tasks in the space meant for my honeymoon, yet there was no awkwardness to it. We moved around each other with the ease of people who had known each other much longer than a week. Over dinner, our conversation turned inevitably to the future, not our future together, which remained deliberately undefined, but our separate paths forward. What happens when you get back to Portland? Sophie asked, refilling our wine glasses. Practical things first, I said. Find a new apartment. The lease on my current place is up soon, and I can't stay there with Jessica's ghost haunting every room. Metaphorical ghost, I hope. God, yes. I smiled at her attempt to lighten the mood. Then focus on work. I've got several projects I neglected during wedding planning that deserve attention. Maybe look for opportunities to expand the firm. And emotionally, I considered the question seriously. Keep moving forward. Accept that what happened with Jessica and Ryan will always be part of my story, but refuse to let it be the most interesting part. I took a sip of wine. What about you? Back to Melbourne and then... The Great Barrier Reef, she said, her face lighting up with passion for her work. Setting up new research stations, training staff, developing protocols. It's the opportunity of a lifetime. It sounds amazing. It is. She paused, swirling, wine in her glass. And complicated. My ex and I worked at the same university. He's still there, with my former research assistant. I'll be traveling back and forth between reef sites and campus. Professional awkwardness guaranteed. That sounds challenging, I acknowledged, but from what I've seen, you're more than capable of handling it. Thanks for the vote of confidence. She smiled, then set down her glass deliberately. So, about that rain check. The directness that had initially caught me off guard was now one of the things I appreciated most about Sophie. No games, no hidden agendas, just honest communication of her thoughts and desires. I'd like to cash that in, I said, meeting her gaze. She stood, rounded the table and offered her hand. I took it and let her lead me to the bedroom, where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Remarkables, their peaks now silver in the moonlight. What followed was both sweet and fierce, healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. With Jessica, intimacy had become routine, comfortable but predictable. With Sophie, everything was discovery. Her responsiveness, her unexpected boldness, the sounds she made when particularly pleased. Most surprising was my own lack of guilt or comparison. I was fully present, not haunted by Jessica's betrayal or our shared history. Afterward, lying tangled in sheets with mountain air cooling our skin, Sophie traced patterns on my chest with light fingers. "No regrets?" she asked quietly. "None," I assured her, and meant it. "You?" "Just that we didn't have more time." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at me directly. "I'm flying out tomorrow night, back to real life." The reminder of our temporary arrangement struck harder than expected. So soon. The conference in Wellington ended early, so I extended my Queenstown stay as long as possible. But my flight to Melbourne is booked, and I start field training next week. I nodded, understanding the practical reality, but still feeling the loss. What time tomorrow? 7 p.m., almost a full day left. I pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair. Then, let's make it count. We spent our final day together, experiencing Queenstown's gentler pleasures, a morning cruise on Lake Wakatipu, lunch at a winery in nearby Gibbston Valley, a leisurely exploration of local art galleries. We didn't talk about the future or make promises neither of us could keep. Instead, we remained firmly in the present, savoring each other's company with the bittersweet awareness of its fleeting nature. At the airport, we stood awkwardly in the departures area, the easy intimacy of the past days suddenly constrained by the publicness of our goodbye. "This is weird," Sophie finally said. "I feel like I should be sad, but mostly I'm just grateful for meeting you, for this time." "Same," I agreed. "You've been exactly what I needed, exactly when I needed it." "Mutual healing," she suggested, with a small smile. Or at least the beginning of it. Definitely that. She glanced at the security checkpoint, then back at me. "I should go." "I know." We kissed one last time, neither lingering nor rushing. a perfect balance of affection and acceptance. "Take care of yourself, Daniel," she said, pulling away. "Be happy. You too, Sophie, and good luck with the research. Save the reefs." She laughed, the sound already familiar and soon to be missed. "I'll do my best." I watched her walk through. Security, turn to wave one final time, then disappear into the terminal. The ache in my chest wasn't the crushing pain of betrayal, but the gentler hurt of saying goodbye to someone who had briefly but significantly touched my life. Walking back to my rental car, I realized I hadn't checked my phone all day. Pulling it out, I found messages from Olivia and Tim, both checking in, and an email notification from Mrs. Harrington at Evergreen Gardens. She'd forwarded an update about Ryan's payment status. He'd fallen behind on the installment plan, necessitating legal action. Once this news would have brought satisfaction. Now, it barely registered. Ryan's problems were increasingly irrelevant to my life, his betrayal losing its power to wound with each passing day. I drove back to my apartment as sunset painted, the mountains in impossible colors. Tomorrow, I'd begin the last leg of my journey, a 3-day trek on the Routeburn Track, one of New Zealand's great walks, followed by a few final days in Queenstown before flying home to Portland. Standing on my balcony that night, I tried to understand what had changed. The facts remained the same. Jessica had betrayed me with Ryan, destroying my trust and upending my future. Yet somehow the story felt different now, less like an ending and more like a difficult chapter in a longer narrative. Sophie had been part of that transformation, certainly, but not all of it. New Zealand itself had worked a kind of magic, its landscapes offering perspective, its people demonstrating resilience. Most importantly, time and distance had allowed me to see beyond the immediate pain to the possibility of a different future than the one I'd planned, perhaps even a better one, built on a foundation of authenticity rather than compromise. I took out my phone and opened Instagram, posting a photo of the sunset over the Remarkables with a simple caption, "Not all those who wander are lost." Beneath it, I added, "Thank you, New Zealand, for reminding me that there's beauty after devastation." The Portland rain welcomed me home, a steady drizzle that made the city gleam under streetlights. After 3 weeks of New Zealand sunshine, the grey skies should have felt depressing, but instead they seemed comforting, a familiar embrace from a city that had witnessed both my highest hopes and deepest disappointments. Tim picked me up at the airport, full of questions about my trip, but sensitive enough not to mention Jessica or Ryan unless I brought them up. I appreciated his tact as we navigated evening traffic toward my soon-to-be former apartment. "Your stuff's all moved into storage," he explained, making a turn onto Burnside. "The movers came yesterday. I supervised, made sure they didn't break anything important." "Thanks," I said, genuinely grateful. I wasn't looking forward to spending my first night backpacking. "You can crash at my place until you find a new apartment. Guest room's all yours." The offer was tempting. The thought of staying in the empty apartment where Jessica and I had lived together held little appeal. But I needed to face it one last time, to see the space stripped of her presence, to reclaim it, however briefly, as my own. I appreciate it, but I think I need one night there. Closure, you know. Tim nodded, understanding without needing explanation. "I'll drop you off then, but the offer stands if you change your mind. Just text, I'll come get you." The apartment looked larger, empty, footprints in the carpet, the only evidence of furniture recently removed. Tim had left an air mattress inflated in the bedroom, a sleeping bag unrolled on top, a thoughtful touch so typical of his quiet kindness. After he left, I wandered the bare rooms, memories surfacing with each familiar scuff mark or nail hole. Jessica and I assembling IKEA furniture, laughing at the incomprehensible instructions. The dinner party, where Ryan had charmed all our friends. his arm casually draped across the back of Jessica's chair, a gesture I'd dismissed as meaningless at the time. The night I'd proposed, returning from the beach to celebrate with champagne, in our tiny kitchen. Strange how places absorb our stories, holding them even when the physical evidence is gone. But the pain I'd expected didn't come. Instead, I felt a gentle sadness, not for what I'd lost, but for what had never really existed except in my imagination. I slept surprisingly well on the air mattress, waking to sunlight streaming through windows no longer covered by curtains. My first day back would be busy, meeting with a real estate agent to see apartments, catching up at the office, dinner with Olivia, who'd driven down from Seattle to welcome me home. The apartment viewings went better than expected. The third place I saw, a modern loft in a renovated warehouse building downtown, felt right immediately. High ceilings, exposed brick, windows overlooking the Willamette River, nothing like the apartment I'd shared with Jessica, which had been her choice more than mine. This space spoke to the architect in me, its industrial bones softened by warm wood and careful design. "I'll take it," I told the agent, not needing to see the other properties on her list. She seemed surprised but pleased. "Great! It's not officially on the market yet, so we can process your application right away. When would you want to move in?" "As soon as possible." By the time I reached the office, the apartment was mine. First, month's rent and security deposit paid, lease signed electronically, keys to be picked up tomorrow. One clean break completed, a new beginning secured. At Mitchell Design Group, the small firm I'd co-founded with Tim 5 years earlier, my return was celebrated with coffee and local pastries. Our team of 8 gathered in the conference room. As I showed them photos from New Zealand, carefully edited to exclude any featuring Sophie. "You look different," noted Elise, our office manager who had worked with us since the beginning. "More relaxed." 3 weeks of vacation will do that, I deflected, though her observation touched something deeper. I did feel different, lighter, more centered, less concerned with others' expectations. The afternoon disappeared in meetings and project reviews. Tim had kept everything running smoothly in my absence, but several clients specifically wanted my input on designs. I lost myself in the familiar rhythms of work, the problem-solving, the creative challenges, the satisfaction of making spaces both beautiful and functional. Dinner with Olivia that evening gave me the chance to share the fuller version of my trip, including Sophie. We sat at a corner table in one of Portland's farm-to-table restaurants, the kind of place where conversations remain private despite the busy atmosphere. "So, let me get this straight," Olivia said after I described meeting Sophie at the hot tub. "You went on your honeymoon and had a vacation fling with an Australian marine biologist who was also escaping a failed engagement? Put that way, it sounded like the plot of a romantic comedy. It wasn't just a fling," I protested. "It was significant." "I'm not judging," she assured me. "Actually, I'm impressed. It's very healthy." "Healthy? That's the word you're going with?" She took a sip of wine, considering. "Yes, healthy. You didn't wallow. You didn't shut down. You stayed open to connection, even knowing it was temporary." Her assessment made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Perhaps because it suggested a degree of emotional maturity I didn't feel I'd earned yet. It just happened. I didn't plan it. "The best things rarely are planned," she said wisely. "Speaking of which, have you heard anything from Jessica?" The question didn't sting as expected. Not directly. According to Tim, she came by the office once while I was gone, asking for my contact information in New Zealand. He refused to give it to her. "Good man," Olivia approved. "And Ryan." One desperate text about the venue payment, which I ignored. "Mrs. Harrington emailed that he's behind on payments, so there's legal action starting." I shrugged, surprised by my own indifference. Not my problem anymore. Olivia studied me over her wineglass. You really are different, she decided. New Zealand was good for you. It was, I agreed. But I think it was less about the place and more about the perspective. Distance helps. Later that night, in the emptiness of what had been our apartment, I found myself thinking about perspective, how problems that seemed enormous up close diminished when viewed from a distance. From a New Zealand mountaintop, my personal drama had appeared small against the vastness of geological time and space. Even now, back in Portland, the betrayal that had seemed world-ending 3 weeks ago felt like one chapter in a much longer story. I'd deleted my social media apps while traveling, needing the mental space without updates from mutual friends or the temptation to check Jessica's profiles. Now, curiosity prompted me to reinstall Instagram, scrolling with caution through the backlog of posts from my Portland circle. Several wedding photos appeared, not mine, thankfully, but a college friend's ceremony that had gone ahead the same weekend mine was cancelled. Amid congratulatory comments, I spotted one from Ryan. Beautiful ceremony, wishing you both all the happiness in the world. The hypocrisy might have angered me once. Now it just seemed sad, almost pitiful. A man who betrayed his best friends. Trust still playing the role of the thoughtful friend to others, the performance increasingly hollow. I scrolled further, then stopped cold at a photo posted by a mutual friend. Jessica stood smiling at a restaurant table, wine glass raised in a toast. The caption read, "Celebrating new beginnings with this amazing woman. Friendship goals." She looked the same, copper hair catching the light, smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. Yet somehow she appeared like a stranger, someone I'd known in another lifetime. I studied the image dispassionately, searching for the familiar twist of pain or anger, finding instead a dull acknowledgement. This person hurt me once, but no longer holds that power. I put the phone down without looking for Ryan in her recent posts or checking if they were publicly together now. It simply didn't matter anymore. The next morning I collected the keys to my new apartment and met the movers at the storage unit. By evening, my essential belongings were installed in the loft, furniture arranged to take advantage of light and space, artwork carefully hung to complement the brick walls, kitchen unpacked and functional. It wasn't fully settled, but it was already more home than the apartment I'd shared with Jessica had ever been. Standing at the wide windows as dusk painted the river pink and gold, I felt a text notification vibrate in my pocket. Sophie had sent a photo of herself in full scuba gear on a research vessel, blue ocean stretching behind her. The caption read, "First day on the reef. Thinking of mountains while surrounded by ocean. Hope Portland's treating you well." I smiled, appreciating the connection without expectation. We'd exchanged numbers before parting in Queenstown, promising to send occasional updates without pressure for anything more. The distance between Portland and Australia's Great Barrier Reef made relationship impossible, but friendship, the kind strengthened rather than diminished by shared vulnerability, seemed sustainable. I replied with a photo of my new apartment. View. First night in new place. Thinking of oceans while surrounded by mountains. Save some coral for the rest of us. Life settled into new patterns over the following weeks. Work expanded to fill the space once occupied by wedding planning, with several exciting projects demanding my full creativity. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during the final months with Jessica, discovering how many relationships had suffered from my narrow focus on a failing engagement. My mother visited from Boise, staying in the loft's guest room for a long weekend. She approved of the new space, noting how much it reflected my personal style rather than the compromised aesthetic of the previous apartment. "You seem happier," she observed as we walked along the riverfront one morning. "More yourself." "I am," I realized, the truth of it settling comfortably, though I'm not sure I recognized it until you said it. "Sometimes we need others to hold up the mirror," she said, looping her arm through mine. "I worried, you know. When Olivia first called about what happened, I thought you might retreat. Into work or bitterness? Both. She squeezed my arm gently. I've seen it happen to good people after betrayal. They build walls so high they can't see over them anymore. Her words resonated with architectural metaphors I understood viscerally. Walls could protect, but they could also imprison. I've been thinking about that, actually. How to stay open without being naive. And I think it's about foundations, rather than walls, I said slowly, articulating thoughts that had been forming since New Zealand. If your foundation is solid, your sense of self, your values, your genuine connections, then you don't need impenetrable defenses. She smiled, pride evident in her eyes. When did you get so wise? Learn from the best, I replied, bumping her shoulder affectionately. 2 months after my return, I received an unexpected email from Mrs. Harrington. Ryan had finally defaulted, completely on the venue payments, and legal proceedings were underway. However, the situation had an unusual twist. She'd been approached by a wedding planning magazine wanting to feature evergreen gardens in a spread about destination venues. They're particularly interested in the story of your cancelled wedding and the contract clause that protected you, she wrote. While I've kept details confidential, the basic facts have become something of a cautionary tale in the industry. The magazine would like to interview you, with appropriate discretion, of course. There would be compensation for your participation. The request was surreal. My personal catastrophe reframed as a case study in contract law and wedding venue policies. I wasn't sure how to feel about it, so I called the one person whose perspective I trusted implicitly. Absolutely do it, Olivia said when I explained the situation. Think about it, Daniel. How many other people might be protected by venues adopting similar policies? Your story could actually help others. She had a point. If more venues included moral turpitude clauses, perhaps fewer people would face financial ruin on top of emotional devastation when relationships imploded before weddings. Plus, she added with characteristic pragmatism, it's the final twist of the knife for Ryan. His betrayal becomes a cautionary tale that changes industry standards while you're portrayed as the reasonable victim who handled things with dignity. That's a bit petty, I observed, though not without appreciation for the irony. Petty, schmetty, it's justice with a cherry on top. I agreed to the interview with conditions: no photographs of me, no names except my own, with permission to use pseudonyms for the others, and final approval of the text. The journalist, a thoughtful woman in her 40s, met me at a quiet cafe away from my usual haunts. Her questions were professional, focused on the contract aspects rather than the emotional fallout. I answered candidly, but without unnecessary detail, emphasizing the importance of understanding legal documents before signing them, especially when involving friends in financial arrangements. Do you regret how things turned out? She asked as our interview concluded. The question gave me pause. Did I regret discovering the betrayal, cancelling the wedding, the financial and legal aftermath? I regret trusting people who didn't deserve trust, I said finally. But I don't regret the outcome. I'm building a life that's more authentic now, more truly mine. She nodded, making a final note. One last question, if I may. What advice would you give someone in a similar situation? I thought of the whale, diving beneath New Zealand waters, of Sophie's smile in mountain sunlight, of my new apartment with its clean lines and open spaces. Remember that endings are also beginnings, I said, and sometimes what feels like devastation is actually liberation in disguise. 6 months to the day after my wedding that wasn't, I received a package from New Zealand. Inside was a bottle of Pinot Noir from the Gibbston Valley winery Sophie and I had visited, along with a note in her distinctive handwriting. Thought you might want to toast non-anniversaries. Life's better on this side of disaster, isn't it? I smiled, setting the bottle aside for evening. Perhaps I'd open it while video chatting with Sophie, our friendship having evolved into regular digital conversations that spanned continents and time zones. Perhaps I'd share it with Tim or Olivia, the people who'd stood by me when it mattered most. Or perhaps I'd simply enjoy it alone on my balcony, watching the river flow past, constant yet ever-changing, like life itself. The doorbell rang, probably the Thai food I'd ordered, interrupting my reflections. I tucked Sophie's note into my pocket and moved to answer it, stepping confidently into the present moment, no longer haunted by the past or anxious about the future. Whatever lay ahead, I was ready to meet it as myself, not as half of a compromised couple or as someone's betrayed fiancé, but as Daniel Mitchell, architect and survivor, building something lasting from the ruins of what never should have been. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.